Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I haven't done a video for a while on this one, but that's because I've been busy writing some books, and one of these books, Pilgrimage of the Guardian, has now been completed. And if you have a look inside, it is a fully illustrated fantasy book, fantasy adventure. And you can get this at Wargame Vault. You can also buy the PDF, and it also has EPUB format, so you can read it on your iPhones. And to get you interested into it, I'm now going to read the first couple of chapters. And if you like it, go to Wargame Vault, look for Pilgrimage of the Guardian, download it, and read it for yourself. Okay? So let's get started with the reading. Pilgrimage of the Guardian. The Krang Regime. No one is certain how Grold, the nation of a race known as the Krangs, became such a belligerent nation. Many have speculated on different causes, such as poverty, or the more narrow-minded, genetics. But the truth was something much more insidious. Several years before Grold declared all-out war on its neighbouring countries, there was a small group of Krangs who owned mine complexes. To work these mines for a large profit margin, it was necessary for them to employ foreign immigrants. The reason for this was that these foreigners were from impoverished countries and could be employed at minimal expense. This exploitation meant that larger profits could be made by the owners of the mines. And gradually, this owner class became part of the elite class among the merchants of Grold. However, some inhabitants of Grold were against this injustice, and stood up against the rich merchants. This threatened the merchants' way of life, and something had to be done to stop interference in their plans. As the merchants had earned many riches from the prolonged exploitation of their workers, they could carry weight in the governing body of the country, bribing the odd unscrupulous politician, which was most of them, in order to get laws passed in their favour. Luck was on their side, though, when one of their number managed to get elected as the governor of Grold. Once in charge, he supported the merchants, and did his very best to pass laws preventing demonstrations against what was happening in the mines, and to keep information from the general populace. After all, they had to keep the workers in their place. At some point along the course of history, it became necessary for the merchants to hire out bodyguards and mercenaries, as people who opposed the biased laws that had been created by the new government were still causing problems, such as vandalism to the machinery of the mines. These bodyguards formed a group known as the Krang Warriors, and they kept these rebels in check. Then a new evil emerged. The government wanted an increase in mine production, and this was to be done by capturing villages from neighbouring countries, and then transporting the inhabitants to the mines to work as slaves. Many Krangs were against this, but by this time no one knew who was for this or against this. Many were too scared to speak out for fear of retribution, and some didn't care as it didn't affect them. In the military, there were only a few who were for this action, but these had mixed in with the masses in small doses. The units close to the government didn't know who was for the new legislation or against it, and none would dare speak out in case they spoke to someone who was for the enslaving. If it were discovered that they were against it, they too could find themselves working in the mines. Gradually, these units all started to act as if they were all for the new laws, and once this was accomplished, they were distributed further afield. No one knew who was serious for the capturing of slaves or against it, but the risk of speaking out was too great. There might have only been one person in an entire unit who was for the slavery, but to the rest it seemed everyone was for it, because no one could tell who was acting and who was the fanatic. And so the process carried on, until the entire army was effectively of one mind, moulded by an incessant stream of propaganda and indifferent to the plight of the people it enslaved. And so Grold carried on its course for conquest to enrich its population. Soon the military started removing any groups that were unwilling to adapt to the new regime. They put several ethnic groups into slavery, but one group at a time. They took the Tia Red Squirrels first. None of the other minority groups spoke out, as it didn't affect them, and so they took each minority group one by one. Then, with the numbers of opposition in the country whittled down, they then started on the remainder of their own kind, who were opposed to the new direction in which the country was taking, as if they were some kind of disease. Some of the objectors were re-educated, while the rest were either fled to neighbouring countries or joined a group of rebels called the Krang Crusaders. Once the country was rid of its foreign bodies, like an animal whose immune system had stripped itself of any bacteria inside it that could make it ill, it then focused on the outside world, and all the possibilities that could be harnessed to increase its strength and swell its belly with pride. For now, the cause for the war was not just a ravenous greed for resources, but also the proudful view that the people of Grold were more deserving of the resources that lay in the neighbouring countries than these countries' own citizens. This self-inflated perspective of a nation spread over Arthandia like a fungus, fueled by the manic energies of its dictators, and unchecked by the people who were too fearful to go against the prevailing ideology. The first country to be invaded was Tia. Maybe it was because of jealousy that this country was chosen, as the inhabitants were quite ingenious with some of their inventions that had improved their lifestyle. Tia wasn't prepared for war, and most of it was taken with ease. Then the focus of Grold was turned to the south, where Melittle Jun slumbered on its fertile fields and metal deposits. Grold extended its arms out, as if it were stretching after having awoken from a deep slumber, and soon armies of Krang warriors were forcing their way into the territory of the less belligerent nations of Bilok Banet, the landmass across which Grold oozed. And so, under these circumstances, the story starts, west of Grold, in a country called Mietel. The land lay prostrated over a steadily sloping landscape, which gradually became more rugged and gained altitude towards the west, almost like a giant couch with a one-rumpled sheet at one end upon which the country had chosen to recline. In the uplands of this country was the fortified town of Reed. This town lay sprawled across a plateau to the west of the country. The west wall of the town stood at the edge of a precipice, as if it were about to commit suicide. Looking east from here, an onlooker might gain a magnificent view of the sloping land, pocked in places by the odd terrace, and patched up by fields. It would give the onlooker the impression that he was looking down upon a green tablecloth that had been repaired repeatedly and had seen better days. However, it was a well-used tablecloth, and that was all that mattered to the people of Mietel, and they were very proud of that fact. Towards the west end of Reed, the town sloped down into a valley that cut through the plateau and wound its way around the undulating folds of land. The buildings that made up the town tried their best to make the most of the space available within the valley, and so the houses clustered around the valley bottom. As the closer these buildings were to the stream that flowed down its centre, the less distance the inhabitants had to walk in order to get some water. Houses by the stream had to have very strong foundations and walls, as these had the weight of an entire column of buildings piling their way up the valley's sides on their shoulders. Buildings stood atop others, just trying to get a glimpse of the stream. If the foundations of one of the buildings next to the stream ever collapsed, an entire column of houses would be lost. It would be like a giant's domino rally, but in a reverse direction. Within the walls of this town, towards the north-east end, where the ground was not as steep, and the houses had roads between them, and even gardens that didn't become another person's roof, there was a grand temple dedicated to the god of omnipresence, the one and only true God. It was said that a great saint had made a journey to this site, guided by the god of omnipresence in dreams, to find lands that were high up and easy to protect from any enemy. After the saint has wended his way to this plateau from the Zinog Waste in the south, he called his people to settle there. Since that time, many people have made a pilgrimage to this temple to worship the god, also referred to as the Lord, and to experience the freedom of travel to and from this place. The journey to the town was quite an effort for the pilgrims owing to its height, and some wished the saint had been guided to a piece of land that was easier to reach, and which had natural hot springs that they could use on arrival, and possibly a sandy beach. There were some pilgrims, though, who really enjoyed the struggles of a good pilgrimage, and saw it as a spiritual as well as a physical journey in life. But only some. One such pilgrim was at this present time meditating in one of the secluded sections of the temple, designed for this purpose. He had been staying in the grounds of the temple and helping with some of the tasks that the priests did daily, such as herb gathering, cooking, cleaning, writing, making beer, and of course tasting the beer. This final activity took up much of the priest's time, as they saw it as their duty to strive for perfection. The figure was wrapped in a cloak made of a dark material, and it had a hood which covered the head and eyes. The cloak mounted in folds as it came in contact with the cold grey floor. On closer inspection, partially hidden by these folds, there was a sword. To say it was just a sword does not give the item enough deference. It was like saying a sequoia was just a plant. This sword was the type of sword that blacksmiths could only dream of making, and if one ever had the ability to make such a sword, it would be a once-in-the-lifetime work of art that would take much experience, skill, sweat, and preparation to achieve. Engraved along the blade of the sword were magic runes that would have different images when perceived from different angles, similar to a holographic image of a character on a card that animates when the card is moved. Yes, whoever wielded this sword really meant business when it came to a battle. The sword probably never would be used in a fight, as it gave the impression of unseen powers that were deeper than any layman's understanding. Much of the weapon's power came from its ability to intimidate, putting all other swords below its contempt, so much so that it seemed that it wouldn't even deign to touch steel with any lesser sword when it came to the nitty-gritty of fighting. We shall now leave this figure to its ruminations, but it is certain that this person will be accounted again in the near future. Otherwise, why would this book have spent so much time describing him? Our attention now turns to a small door leading off from the main hall of the temple. The door is one of those typically small doors that were never designed to be used by anyone larger than a midget. Squeezing through this, the room beyond opens out upon a scene involving a couple of priests, a table, a lectern, 3 chairs, one of which is highly decorated, and several shelves stacked with decrepit books. This was one of the studies of the temple where the training of priests took place. Knowledge and wisdom from many centuries of living in the confines of the temple had been compiled laboriously in several of the studies inside the temple. With so many of the priests doing writing as one of their pastimes in the temple, these books had stacked up quickly over the years, and now they were fighting for shelf space. Books were wedged in wherever they could fit, and one of the main principles in the study was that nothing could ever be thrown away. This meant that amongst the books in the study were laundry lists from more than 5 centuries ago, past rotas. In fact, most of the books were of this sort. After all, very little knowledge and wisdom can be gleaned and compiled when one lives in the confines of a temple. One of the precepts of the temple studies was that women were not allowed in them. This law was once repealed, and to the shock of the priests, they saw the study become reorganised, and irreplaceable documents, such as our 300-year-old book containing bowling scores for the gardening team, making their way to the nearest dustbin. Since that time, the law was put back into place, but even now, it still sends a shiver up the spines of some of the older priests, who remember that time whenever they see a woman entering the temple with a feather duster. The priests were at this moment copying down a treatise on the methodology required for carrying out the sacrosanct ritual of applying fresh paint to the lawn ornaments, but with fancier artwork applied to their scripts in comparison to the original. Sometimes ritual documents had to be recopied and changed slightly, usually to compensate for where part of the temple where the ritual took place had collapsed, or was unsafe to use, or perhaps a memorable occasion had happened on a day that was full up with ritual already, and so to commemorate it, an extra flagon of beer would be consumed in deference to this. One of the priests looked up from his work. "Where has that Terrick got to?" said the priest to the other. "I would have thought he would have wanted to know about this sacred ritual. Maybe it is not of great importance compared with the others, but then I would never dare put him in charge of the more sacred rituals of our hereditary." "Oh, come now," replied the other in an old stuffy voice, which is a general characteristic of people who spend all their time with their noses in books, allowing the rush of the outside world to pass them by. A listener may have thought that the priest had never taken a breath of fresh air. "These young whippersnappers are always on the move and never stand still long enough to learn anything. Well, he will have to learn sometime if he wants to get anywhere in our order." There was a sudden rattle as someone tried the doorknob of the door to the room, which made both of the gentlemen look up, and following far quicker than either of them men expected was a sudden banging on the door. "Will that be him? At blast! I was getting such a good curve on that D, and now I've ruined the look of it. I'll open the door, shall I?" Seeing that his fellow colleague was still silently fussing over the letter that he had despoiled, he decided it would have to be him who would take the initiative and allow entry to the mysterious guest from without. He didn't rush, though, because he still had to maintain his dignity. He was a priest of mature years, and one thing that he knew about his position was that it was rude to rush a priest with age and experience such as his, and he used this to his full advantage. "Just coming," he called, trying to ease the impatience of a person on the other side. Youth, he thought. Does anything good ever come from it? On opening the door, but very slowly so as to keep a boundary between himself and the impetuous nature of the person on the opposite side, he twisted his neck round into the gap now created by the drawing of the door towards the interloper. He raised his eyebrows with slow deliberation in the direction of the young neophyte on the other side. The expression would have been better accentuated if he had been wearing half-moon spectacles at the time, with which to look over. "Ah, young Terrick, my lad. So you have decided to forsake your ramblings with the other youngsters in the grounds, and have come to learn something from the wizened denizens of this temple?" By youngsters, the priest meant any member of the order under 40 years of age. "Something like that, sir. May I come in?" "Why, certainly. Make yourself at home, and after all, home is where the heart is, and we would like your heart to be here." The priest gave what could be passed as a chuckle at his own joke, which turned into a chesty cough. Terrick kept a straight face. The priest concluded that he couldn't have understood the joke, as it was surely impossible that he, a man with such experience, could have ever made a poor one. "Very well, sir," said Terrick, quite meekly, and with his head turning this way and that, as though uncertain about the territory he was about to enter. Terrick looked to the priest, gave a quick bow, and then entered the room. Okay, well, that's a brief glimpse of what the book has to offer. All the pictures that were displayed during my reading are all pictures from the book, so I hope that grabbed your interest. And as I say, check the book out on Wargame Vaults, and if you like the look of it, then you can download it. And as I say, that it's got several versions. You can either buy the printed version, or you can buy the PDF, which is much cheaper, which also comes with an EPUB document, so you can read the book on your iPhone, although with the EPUB document you don't have any of the pictures. Okay? So I think that's pretty much all from me, except for happy reading if you decide to download the book. Okay? And I'll probably do another video again
Sometime in the future. Don't know when, but we'll see. Bye for now.